The coffee machine hissed at him again. David Wren squinted at it, half convinced it had developed an attitude. He tapped the side with a finger, which only made the thing bubble ominously. "Make one decent cup," he muttered, "and I'll consider not throwing you out the airlock." The machine, possibly fluent in sarcasm by now, whined and produced something vaguely brown. He sighed. Life on orbital station. Theta 7 wasn't glamorous. Retired life never was, especially when you'd spent your prime years dodging plasma fire, patching hull breaches with duct tape and hope, and arguing with commanding officers who couldn't tell a fusion wrench from a pastry fork. And now, he argued with appliances. The station lights flickered, then steadied as if embarrassed. David took a sip and winced. Of course, the machine would brew revenge. He was about to hurl the cup into the recycler when the console chirped. Not the usual "oxygen filters clogged again" chirp. No, this was the "you've got mail" of the interstellar sort. Haughty, imperial, and far too melodic for something that often brought bad news. He blinked. The sender ID was encrypted, then decrypted itself, then decrypted again, because apparently Elendari security protocols like to feel important. "Queen Arella of the Elendari Dominion requests your immediate presence." He stared. Another line blinked into view. "Attendance is not optional." "Of course it isn't," he said to the coffee machine, which gurgled in sympathy. By mid-afternoon, he was on a transport shuttle with a pilot who refused to make eye contact, and an AI named Jasper, who had the personality of a bored librarian. "Flight duration, 13 standard hours," Jasper announced. "I have queued a curated playlist of Elendari diplomatic overtures in 5-part harmony." "I'd rather be spaced," David replied. "I have noted your preference." 13 hours later, he arrived at Elender Prime. If space had a Versailles, this was it. Gleaming spires spiraled into orbit like someone had challenged gravity to a duel in one. The landing pad shimmered with magnetic light, and the welcome party, draped in silver and red, looked like they just stepped out of a propaganda reel. He disembarked with the posture of a man who'd slept poorly and didn't trust anything that glittered. A tall figure approached. Royal Guard, probably. Ceremonial armor. Shimmered like a storm cloud. "Corporal David Wren," the guard said with a voice like crushed velvet. "The Queen awaits." "No time for a snack first?" David asked. "Intergalactic summons usually come with crackers." The guard didn't laugh. Elendari humor, as he recalled, was outlawed sometime in the last century for being inefficient. He was escorted through crystalline corridors that hummed softly as he walked, like the walls were gossiping about his boots. The palace smelled faintly of ozone and citrus. Statues watched him, not metaphorically. Some blinked. Then he entered the throne chamber. It was big, which was probably the point. Political scale and all that. At the far end, seated on a floating platform edged with living silver, was the queen herself. Long ears, pale skin, hair black as void space, pulled back with ceremonial bands. She stood as he approached, her expression unreadable. He stopped 3 paces short, unsure whether to bow, salute, or do jazz hands. "I, got your invite," he said. She looked at him for a long time, the kind of look that measured years, not moments. Then she smiled, hesitant, warm, and entirely human in its awkwardness. "Do you remember me, human?" David opened his mouth, closed it, then scratched the back of his neck. "Look, no offense, your radiance or luminosity or whatever title you use, but I meet a lot of people. I've saved a lot of lives. Some of them were probably yours." A soft chuckle from the throne. The ministers flanking her stiffened. Apparently laughter was a breach of decorum. "You once rescued a child from the wreckage of mining moon X3F, she said. "You carried her through fire. You told her not to cry." He blinked. A memory stirred. Fuzzy. A tiny shape in his arms. The smell of smoke. "She had a necklace," he said slowly. "Little glowing stone. Kept telling me it was very important." Erla touched the gem at her throat. "Same stone." He let out a breath. "Well, I'll be damned." "I was 6, she said. "You were the only human I'd ever met. You looked like a walking injury, but you didn't leave me." I didn't have much of a plan, to be honest. Mostly just screamed and ran in the same direction for a while. That direction saved me. Silence settled, reverent and awkward. Look, he said, shifting uncomfortably. I didn't do anything special. Just got lucky. Right place, right time. Also, I tripped over 3 crates. Not exactly a hero's march. But you were kind, she said, and I never forgot. David glanced around at the assembled Elendari elites. They stared at him like he was either a divine omen or an especially irritating insect. So, why summon me now? He asked. Her gaze didn't waver. Because the galaxy is changing, and I need someone I can trust. He raised an eyebrow. You sure you've got the right guy? My resume mostly includes sarcasm and minor back pain. Arala smiled again, wider this time. Those may be exactly what we need. There was a collective shudder from the ministers. One even dropped his ceremonial tablet. David sighed. All right, but I'm not wearing robes. I draw the line at robes. I'll make a royal decree, she said, and for the first time in a long time, he laughed. David's guest quarters were the size of a mid-range starliner, and yet he still managed to trip over the same invisible step 3 times in the first hour. The room responded with polite, ambient lighting and a soothing voice that informed him, very gently, that the floor had not, in fact, moved. I'm watching you, he muttered to the floor. The lights dimmed slightly in what he decided was a sarcastic shrug. Since arriving at Elender Prime, his routine had become a surreal blend of royal protocol and intergalactic absurdity. Mornings began with a 3-hour etiquette orientation, led by a floating orb named Glim, who had a tendency to beep disapprovingly every time David sat down incorrectly. Midday brought him to meetings he didn't understand, surrounded by ministers with facial tattoos that pulsed when they were annoyed, which was always. Evenings, oddly enough, were reserved for informal cultural exchange with Queen Arola herself. That's when things got weird and oddly comfortable. So you mean to tell me, Arola said, perched cross-legged on a hovering cushion, that humans invented juggling is a form of entertainment? It was either that or more politics, David replied, tossing 3 Elendari fruit orbs into the air with only 2 crashing to the floor. One of those decisions aged better than the other. She smiled, then leaned forward. And this pizza you speak of, it's real? As real as heartburn. He didn't expect her to laugh, but she did. Not a royal chuckle or diplomatic giggle, but a full, uncontrolled burst of laughter that made 2 nearby guards exchange horrified glances. These moments became their ritual. The queen and the ex-soldier, talking late into the palace night, sharing stories of childhoods on different worlds. She told him of moons that sang during eclipses. He told her of Earth's Friday traffic. By the 3rd night, they'd settled into an easy rhythm, her teasing formality, his disarming sarcasm. But somewhere between the jokes, the memories began to bleed back. He didn't notice them at first. A sudden pang when she mentioned hiding as a child. The vague scent of burning coolant in the air making his stomach turn. He hadn't thought about that mission in years. They'd been ordered to evacuate the outer colonies. Civilian mining colonies, most of them in Elendari neutral space, caught in the crossfire of a proxy war no one even remembered the name of now. He was just a private back then. His dropship was hit mid-descent. The rest was chaos. Smoke, screaming, children being herded into evacuation tunnels, and him stumbling over debris, finding a small girl behind a fractured bulkhead. She was covered in soot and trying very hard not to cry. You told me I could hold your hand, Arilla said one evening, but only if I didn't wipe my nose on it. He blinked. That sounds like me, even heroic under pressure. You also threatened to throw a plasma grenade at your commanding officer if he left without us. Also sounds like me. The memory hit harder than expected, not just because of the danger, but because she trusted him, and somehow he'd mattered. That night, Arilla invited him to something called the Memory Hall. David stared at the pulsating violet archway. This looks like something that eats brains. It doesn't, she said, leading him in. It just lets you share them. Very reassuring. Inside, the room pulsed with low harmonic tones. Floating spheres of light drifted around them. She stepped onto a platform and gestured for him to do the same. You don't have to, she said, voice softer than usual, but I want you to see what I saw. Back then, the neural link activated before he could ask what the side effects were. A low hum echoed in his chest. And then, images. The crumbling mining outpost, sirens, the smell of metal and plasma. A tiny form crouched behind a crate. Him, younger, blood on his sleeve, speaking softly. "You're okay. We're going to get out of here. But no crying. Deal?" The child nodding, her fingers squeezing his, the hallway behind them collapsing, his arms lifting her. David staggered back, blinking away tears that didn't feel like his own. "You remembered it better than I did," he said. "I never forgot," Erla replied. A long silence stretched between them. "I didn't save you for any noble reason," he admitted. "I was scared. You were there. I couldn't leave you behind. It was just instinct. That instinct shaped my entire life." He scratched his neck. No pressure or anything. Outside the memory hall, the air felt heavier. He was beginning to understand what this all meant. Not just to her, but to the Alindari. He'd become a symbol, a human face attached to a story that had spread through their culture, reshaped their perception of humanity. And now Irela was using that story. She brought him into council meetings, had him speak awkwardly, haltingly, about peace, about cooperation, about how not every soldier was a weapon. The ministers didn't like it. One hissed through their gill flaps when David made a joke about how humans and Elendari both feared public speaking more than death. Another loudly declared him unqualified to advise royal policy, to which David replied, "You're absolutely right. I've failed galactic history twice, but I've got a good gut instinct and a very patient friend with long ears." The room fell silent. Erla looked dangerously close to smiling. Again. Afterwards, she joined him in the garden that hovered above the palace spires. "You're not what they expected," she said. "I'm not what I expected. They think I'm making a mistake." "Are you?" She paused. "Maybe, but it's a mistake I trust." They stood there a while, watching the bioluminescent birds circle the dome. David glanced sideways. "You ever think maybe I should wear a cape or something? Really lean into this whole mysterious savior role?" She raised an eyebrow. "Only if it's waterproof. You sweat a lot during council meetings." He grinned. "Noted, Your Majesty." For the first time in years, the future didn't feel like a report he hadn't read yet. It felt like something he might actually be part of. They were going to assassinate her. David found out by accident, which is exactly how he'd found out most important things in his life. Overhearing something he wasn't supposed to while trying to find snacks. The palace pantry was oddly secured, not locked exactly, just designed in a way that discouraged aimless wandering by peckish humans. Still, he'd mastered the art of a Lindari sliding door override, which mostly involved shouting "Open Sesame" and then pretending he knew what he was doing when it worked. He was halfway to a particularly alluring container labeled "Preserved Starch Sticks of Lunar Fire" when voices echoed through the ventilation shaft above. "The queen is soft," one whispered in Elendari. "She has let the human infect her judgment," another said. Tonight, during the convergence ceremony, David froze, snackless. By the time he got to Erla's chambers, slightly out of breath and with starch residue on his fingers from a poorly timed detour, she was already dressed in ceremonial armor. Not the ornate kind, the real kind. The kind meant for fighting, not impressing. "I know," she said before he spoke. "I was hoping to surprise you with this treason revelation," he said. "I was even working on a dramatic entrance line. They've been planning it for months. The moment I named you as my ambassador to the Terran Coalition, they decided I was no longer fit to rule. Well, you could demote me. I wouldn't take it personally. You've seen my track record with forks." Her smile was brief, but it landed like a sunrise. "They're expecting me to walk into the Great Hall alone," she said. "What they won't expect is backup." "I was hoping you'd say that. I've been practicing my menacing scowl." "David," she said gently, "they're going to try to kill me. Maybe you too." "Okay, maybe not the scowl then. But listen, I've had 12 years of semi-retirement and at least 3 missions that ended in spontaneous combustion. I've been bored. This is practically a vacation." The convergence ceremony was the most sacred event in Elendari culture. Held once every generation, It was meant to realign the Dominion's moral trajectory, if that trajectory happened to coincide with whoever won the last power struggle. David followed Arella into the chamber like a man stepping into a theater, unsure if he was the hero or the guy who gets vaporized during intermission. The chamber was vast. Hundreds of Alindari nobles stood in concentric rings, draped in ceremonial fiber weave. Floating platforms shifted silently overhead, carrying diplomats and psionic adjudicators. Arella stood in the center, regal, still, alone, until he stepped beside her. Gasps echoed like dropped glasses. One minister actually fainted. Arella's voice rang out, calm and clear. My reign has been questioned. My judgment, challenged. But I offer no apologies for choosing a man who once chose a frightened child over his own safety. David scratched his ear. She's talking about me, by the way, just to be clear. A flicker of laughter in the crowd, just enough to make the room hesitate. Then the lights dimmed. From the far end of the hall, 3 armored figures approached. Here we go, David muttered. Time to earn my ceremonial cape. The lead conspirator stepped forward, voice laced with venom. You have forsaken our traditions. You have corrupted our future with Terran influence. Step down or we will remove you. Arella didn't flinch. You want to kill me in the name of purity, but I've seen what purity does. It burns worlds and buries children. David leaned closer. That was so much better than my speech. Mine started with ladies and gentleworms. The traitors attacked. It was over faster than anyone expected. Arella moved like lightning channeled through silk, every strike efficient and merciful. David, armed only with a plasma baton and a deep loathing for cardio, managed to disable one with a well-timed chair throw. Tell the historians, he panted, that I brought honor to the furniture division. When the final conspirator collapsed, stunned and disarmed, the chamber erupted. Not in chaos, but in silence. Reverent. Arella turned to the assembled court. This is what unity looks like, she said. Not fear, not dogma, but trust between worlds. Later, as medics and peacekeepers cleared the hall, David sat beside her on the edge of the floating platform. So, does this mean I'm officially part of the government now? You are, she said. Can I make a law where we get more human food around here? Because I'm 90% starch stick and regret at this point. You may propose it, and you'll veto it. Almost certainly. They sat in the warm hush of aftermath. You know, he said, I didn't think I had much left to offer. I was just a guy who survived things. You offered kindness when I needed it most, she said, and you still do. He looked at her. Not the queen, not the warrior, just her. I remembered you, he said, not the details, but the feeling that I couldn't leave you behind. You didn't. No, he said, and I won't. Weeks later, when the newly drafted Intergalactic Accord was signed with David Wren as the first human envoy to the Alindari Dominion, he wore a slightly wrinkled ambassador's sash and mismatched boots. In his speech, he quoted her. Unity isn't agreement, it's trust. Then he added, and more importantly, everyone gets a slice of pizza after. The Alindari delegates were confused, but they clapped. The galaxy didn't change in a day. But it changed. And David Wren, former corporal, reluctant diplomat, accidental hero, was no longer just a man who had survived. He was a man who had been remembered.